Sleep, movement, diet in that order, that would be the first place to start. There are certain things that can more quickly align your body to whatever time zone or sleep environment that you want to create. This is especially useful information for people who travel frequently and cross multiple time zones. Until that hole that is eternal is filled with something eternal, there will always be a gnawing of unfulfillment.
Welcome to the Health Insights Podcast. In this episode, we're hosting Ben Greenfield, who shares the importance of prioritizing sleep, exercise, and nutrition for optimal health. He discusses actionable strategies for improving sleep quality, the significance of understanding your unique sleep chronotype, and the role of experiential learning in parenting for healthier development. This show is brought to you by Thea Health. Thea helps power your health business by aggregating and analyzing your clients' continuous glucose monitoring data. Go to theahealth.ai to learn more. All right, let's get started with today's show.
Awesome. Ben, really nice to have you, man.
Well, thanks, Boris.
Yeah. I want to dive into, I think this is important to unpack. I think a lot of people know your brand as bleeding edge, biohacker, always on the forefront of tech, right? But what would you say to people in a world that has fleeting focus, right? Social media has our attention, TV has our attention. We're seeing thousands of ads a day. Family wants our attention. Everything wants our attention, right? And when you're trying to get healthy, and if you're not, there's all these pockets that you could focus on. And I know you talk about a lot of things such as space around you, the body, spirit, the people, wealth management. In your opinion, let's say I'm trying to get healthy and maybe not optimal, maybe I'm not, great and trying to live forever. Where would you start? Is there an area that you specifically think is the most important starting point? Or is it more of a function of we need to understand what's going on with you and there's going to be pillars that we want to latch onto and optimize from there?
Quite the question. In simplicity, really three main things to focus on. You're just getting started in this rank prioritize order. 1, sleep. 2, exercise. 3, nutrition. If you sleep well, you're going to move well. You're also going to be less likely to cave into sugar craving. If you move well, and research has shown this, that people who exercise automatically make healthier food choices throughout the day. There is such a thing as hypercompensation, where some people will overcompensate for exercise by eating too many calories. But for the most part, if you start off your day with some type of a movement session, you're more likely to eat healthy the rest of the day because you gain momentum. And the precursor to a good movement session is good sleep, because then you have motivation to do so. Anyone who's been short on sleep probably recognized the lack of willpower to move and the lack of willpower around hyperpalatable foods. So sleep, movement, diet in that order, that would be the first place to start.
Amazing. And what would you say to people that are like, okay, I get it, Ben, I need to sleep better. I need to go to bed on time. I just can't get myself to do that. I'm awake. My thoughts are running through me. I'm stressed about my life. If I can't get to that place, is there a specific, and I know you have coaching and you walk through people through these problems, right? So is there things that you've noticed that get people into a state where they can do that easier than others?
They can do what?
Get to sleep and sleep longer.
It depends on why you're not sleeping. There are many factors. You mentioned ruminating thoughts or laying in bed awake at night thinking about things, right? In many cases, that is someone with a specific gene pathway, a COMT gene pathway, that causes them to have kind of the same type of hardwiring that hundreds of years ago would have made them good at being a sentry guarding the village at night, but doesn't really serve you that well in this day and age. And you see this a lot in entrepreneurs, hard charging, high achievers, people who get a lot of ideas. And unfortunately, they get a lot of ideas inconveniently at like 3 a.m. or as they're trying to fall asleep at night. So in that population, usually having some mechanism in place to get thoughts out of your head and onto paper is good. You can have like a lit pilot pen light next to the bed, a notepad, preferably not a device, or a device in night mode, just notes open in airplane mode, via which you're able to jot down things before you go to bed, or if you wake up, get it out of your head and onto paper. You can also use certain compounds that will shut down to a certain extent some of those hardwired dopamine firing pathways. This would be a lot of your traditional herbs like ashwagandha, valerian root, chamomile, any of those more relaxing type of compounds. You can also use, I suppose this would be in the realm of biohacking technology, but certain forms of stimulation to gradually train your body to downregulate some of the beta brainwaves that are associated with the gene pathway or with ruminating in general. So the most classic example of this would be, for example, a clinical-based neurofeedback, where you're actually working with a neurofeedback practitioner over a series of sessions where you have electrodes attached to your head, and typically it's anywhere from 5 to 10 different meetings to do that, which sounds laborious and logistically inconvenient and expensive, which it is. But now you can use at-home tools that aren't quite as powerful, but give you a pretty good response when it comes to retraining your brain how to dehabituate some of those more stressful beta brain waves, or the type of things that might keep you awake at night. Examples of that would be like the Brain Tap or the Neurovisor light sound stimulation machine, come with specific recipes that you follow, typically either before bed or at a different time of day, like during the day, for like a meditation session or something like that. And by using those regularly, you can gradually train your body to shift into different brainwave states without necessarily having to wear that headgear at night. It's also interesting because when you are ruminating, you're often engaged in processes that put a lot of blood more towards the frontal cortex of the brain. Now there are companies even producing headgear that cools the front section of the brain that you can wear at night. There is something to be said, of course, for keeping your room and sleeping area cool anyways, just because you're going to get better deep sleep with lower core temp. But specifically shifting focus away from that front section of the brain, and this might sound kind of esoteric and woo, but one guy I interviewed on my podcast, Dr. Peter Martone, and this actually works. I've tried this multiple times. If you are doing memory recall, or recall of something that you've memorized, that can actually really help you to disengage from forward thoughts and rumination. And by engaging in previous thoughts, you can shift your brain into a state where it's not constantly planning and ideating. So an example of that would be going through your entire day that you just lived, or the day before, if you can remember back that far. What'd you do? What'd you eat? Who'd you meet with? What were you grateful for? What type of experiences did you have? For me, I like to memorize the Bible just because it's got a lot of good truth in it. So I'm often reciting, if I wake up, whatever it was that I was memorizing earlier that day or earlier that week. And it sounds silly, but it's kind of like counting from 100 down to 0 backwards by threes, right? That's a very simple example of that. But even that process alone can keep you from thinking about other things. Very similar to the last thing I'll share with you, and that would be something like non-sleep deep rest protocols. So this would be like yoga nidra, for example. This is a form of relaxation in which you're scanning your body, typically head to toe or toe to head, sometimes the internal organs, bringing attention to your eyebrows, and then the bridge of your nose, and then your jaw, and then your tongue. And as you go through this process over anywhere from 20 minutes, and some take up to 2 hours, you're simulating a sleep-like state. And many people who have ruminating thoughts, because their brain is forced to just be thinking about body parts, it tends to shift you into sleep or a sleep-like state. Those are a few things that you can mess around with for the sleep component.
No, excellent. I think you gave probably like 10 or 12 actionable pieces of advice that people could latch on to. Just to unpack it a little bit more, sleep types, I forgot what they were called, but like you could be a bear, dolphin, etc. Do you believe in those? Do you feel like, because there's multiple people, some people say any hour before 12 is your reparative hours of sleep, and so therefore you should be going to bed earlier. Some people say if you're a phenotype or whatever, I forgot the name, it's like, but some people wake up super early and they can do that. Some people are bears and they sleep 11 to 7, like kind of a regular schedule. Do you have an opinion on sleep timing in that matter, or the type of person that you are, and you can either wake up super early or maybe not?
Sleep chronotyping is something that's probably been popularized the most by Dr. Michael Brew, who went by the name of the Sleep Doctor for a while, and wrote a book in which he described the dolphin that would wake at a variety of different hours or be able to operate in a variety of different wake time sleep cycles. The wolf is more of a nocturnal environment animal. The lion is more like a 8, 9 p.m. to 4 or 5 a.m. type of creature, and the bear is like 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., which a lot of people are. It's interesting, and there is something to be said for certain people being night owls or morning larks or early birds or whatever you want to call them. And some of it is genetically hardwired. Some of it is due to more of a nurture type of environment where that's just what you grew up with or how you've trained yourself to operate. The issue with chronotyping is simply trying to split people into 4 different populations and require them all to sleep according to those hours is often societally restrictive and not very logistically feasible. Like, what if you have a family and dad's a dolphin and mom's a wolf, and Billy's a bear and Jill is a lion? Like, it's just, it doesn't work that well once you take it to the streets. So what's important to understand is the concept, and this is important for sleep in general, chronotyping aside, the concept of zeitgebers. This is a German term that means timekeepers. There are certain things that can more quickly align your body to whatever time zone or sleep environment that you want to create. This is especially useful information for people who travel frequently and cross multiple time zones. So a few of the more powerful zeitgebers. One is light. Let's say that you have been waking up at 4 a.m. consistently, and that annoys the heck out of you because you really need that extra hour of sleep and you want to wake up at 5 a.m. But you've also been back east for the past week, and so you live in the Pacific time zone, and your body at 7 a.m. Eastern time is waking up at 4 a.m. Pacific time. What you would do if you wanted to use light as a zeitgeber is you would wait until 5 a.m. You could get up at 4 a.m. because you actually really don't want to spend time in bed laying awake thinking. That trains your body to spend time in bed laying awake thinking, right? You can get up, but you generally want to do things like wear blue light blocking glasses, keep your phone in night mode, keep the screens dimmed, don't turn off or turn on a lot of lights in your home, or at least if you are, you're using red light. Like, I even travel, it's like a red light headlamp, so I don't have to turn on the lights in my hotel room. And you're essentially simulating sunrise or a very early morning environment without bright light until the time arrives at which point that you want to start waking up. And that's when you would do something like go look at sunlight or flip the screen out of night mode or look at your computer monitor, or even use like one of those seasonal affective disorder boxes that they use for light therapy, like very bright light on your office desk or in your living room or whatever. So in a similar way, you can also shift your circadian rhythm forward or backwards in the evening, right? Like, let's say you've been getting really tired at 8 p.m. and maybe you are hardwired to be a lion and your entire family are bears and you really don't have the option to go to bed at 8 p.m. You want to stay up till 10 p.m. Well, whereas a lot of people would say, well, put on the blue light blocking glasses and dim the lights whenever the sun's starting to set in whatever area of the world you happen to be in. You might wait to do that. Right? You might actually add extra light in later in the day to shift your circadian rhythm forward. Or alternatively, let's say it's the opposite scenario, you would actually bust out any blue light blocking devices earlier in the day to send your body a message earlier in the day that it's nighttime. So light's an example of a zeitgeber. Food is a protein-rich meal when you wake. So the idea of intermittent fasting can be good for metabolism. It isn't so great for circadian biology in terms of sending your body a message that it's supposed to slowly begin to increase the sleep drive that accumulates during the day, right? So if you have been staying up very late at night, you've been intermittent fasting, maybe you're not having your first meal until 11 a.m. or noon or whatever, that is going to shift your circadian biology forward. By getting up and having, let's say, a protein-rich meal, 20 to 30 grams of protein, and maybe you're having some sweet potatoes and eggs and, a cup of coffee with some collagen in it or whatever. You're actually going to have that at, let's say, 8 a.m. or 7 a.m. or closer to waking compared to what you might do if you were just engaged in intermittent fasting. You have to choose which is more important, sleep or maybe, shifting my body into fat burning mode or some of these claims made around intermittent fasting. Another zeitgeber is temperature. Exposure to a cool environment earlier in the day can shift the circadian rhythm or backwards again, meaning like if I were to jump in the cold bath at 5 a.m. and I have been staying up really late and going to bed at like 11 p.m. or 10 p.m. and I want to stop staying out that late. I realize 11 p.m. or 10 p.m. is normal for a lot of people. Late for me, I'm an old fuddy-duddy. But getting into something cold, taking a cold shower earlier in the day would help you go to bed earlier at night. So when you travel, let's say you arrive in London at 5 p.m., right? And so maybe it's 10 a.m. back home where you are. You would begin to engage in light restriction pretty early so that you're shifting your body into it's evening in London time zone. You would wait until, let's say, 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. or whatever the normal dinner time is in the final destination to actually eat. You would do something that cools the body a little bit. And that's how you kind of play with some of these zeitgebers to take whatever chronotype that you're naturally hardwired for and kind of tweak it forwards or backwards a little bit.
No, amazing points. I resonate with that a lot because I used to fly to Asia all the time. And one guy literally solved all my life problems. He's like, you fly at midnight and you sleep the first 8 hours, and then it takes another 12 hours to get there. You get there around 2 p.m., go outside right away, get the sun in, and then cool yourself down in a cold shower. And then by the time it's like 9 p.m., you're ready to go. On their time zone, you sleep probably at least 10 hours and you're good.
Right.
Before that, I was flying in. It was like midnight there. It was daytime here. And I could not, it took like 3 days to adjust.
Yeah. And that's when people start messing with Valium and copious amounts of coffee and, pulling all the stimulants. Yeah.
Just be out for the whole flight. And I'm like, but that doesn't resonate with me, right? I'm like, I don't want to just take drugs all the time, especially flying over like 20 time zones.
Right.
Awesome. And the point of, look, there's lots of variables. You can't just be one of these 4 types, because I don't know about you, but like sometimes I get a surge, in the evening, and I'm like, I really am feeling creative. I want to go for it. We went out and we're in Nashville, both of us. Everybody wanted to go out. I went to bed a little bit later. I personally felt that if I can get 7.5 hours in, it doesn't, depend if it's 9 p.m. or 1 a.m. Sure, it's more optimal if it's earlier, because then that's kind of like the circadian rhythm doesn't get blown off. But do you feel like that, if it was like the simplest thing on earth, it was like, just get that 7 to 8 hours? Or do you still feel like, no, we should be optimizing sleep to be the best that there is, not just time frame?
You mentioned it, and you are correct to note the small amount of data that suggests that the sleep time between 10 p.m. and midnight is pretty important, and that you may miss out on optimized sleep cycles and have more light sleep and deep sleep if you're going to bed after midnight.
Okay, perfect. I did want to dive into, you have a very unique way, and I'm going to tie this back to health, of raising your kids. I know that you've talked about this a lot, where you say, hey, we're going to go build something, or we're going to work with our hands to get the end outcome. Have you seen a correlation of that type of approach being them in a healthier state than, and in many different ways, like not just like, are they healthy that day, but like their brain development is better. They're going to be able to critically think more. I think there's a lot of parents that are going to be listening to this and be interested in that approach. So I'd love to unpack a little bit of what you've seen or patterns that you've noticed doing it that way.
You're asking me, have I seen patterns in terms of the way that my children act or operate during the day based on building something? Education in general.
Eight classes a day. Try to memorize math and then science and then this and do homework, right? And I felt like your approach was a lot more unique, and you're a guy that is so heavily focused on, family and your health. So I was just wondering if you've seen that your approach to parenting has made them healthier outside of the normal, like I'm sure their diet is awesome. I'm sure you guys focus on, sleep hygiene and stuff like that. But I'm trying to unpack some of the things that are more not so commonly talked about in other content that you have.
I think what you're getting at is the value of an experiential based education. The difference between that and the educational philosophy largely adopted in most Western society is that if you need to accomplish a task repetitively, or repeat information or engage with information in such a way that you have it memorized or in your head, then you would operate pretty successfully in an industrial or even a post-industrial era that is somewhat void of computerized technology and automation. We don't live in an era void of computerized automation and AI anymore. So the idea of teaching a human being to be something other than a robot, in my opinion, has some value. Meaning, would you rather learn geometry equations or would you rather go build a tree fort in which you're having to calculate angles and, do wood cutting measurement, or go and learn how orthopedic surgery and bone cutting works to see that if the screw is placed at a specific angle, then you're able to fix a knee better, something like that. If you are going to learn chemistry, would you rather learn salt, acid, sugar, heat, fats, etc., via culinary experiences in the evening when you're preparing dinner, or from a textbook in which you're memorizing equations? There are pretty few situations now where memorizing a host of equations or facts and then spitting them out via a test is going to serve you very well versus life-based experience. There is value to memorization. It grows the brain. I talked about how I memorized the Bible, for example, and that gives me something positive to draw on that kind of fits on my heart and in my head. Some people will memorize Shakespeare or philosophy, or, people are weird and into differential equations. I don't think that the utility of those from a work and productivity standpoint are that high. There might be some personal development and brain growth type of benefits, but the idea of something like what I call what my wife do with our son, unschool, right? Surrounding a child with as many passions, interests, and dreams and desires as possible that allow them to, in a hands-on format, experience life and do things, right? Cooking, woodworking, animal husbandry, gardening, wilderness survival, etc. Learning about key concepts through that lens, I think you're going to create a more dynamic human who could be a little bit more resilient and also creative, able to think outside the box. Because for me as an employer, I do work with a lot of folks who are more Generation Z, who have been educated in traditional public schooling or traditional westernized schooling environment. And sometimes it is difficult to get people to think creatively, think outside the box, not, basically have smoke come out their ears if they're required to create rather than just manage or inventory or check boxes. So I have been most impressed with the homeschooled or unschooled or alternatively schooled people, including employees who I've worked with, because they're able to think outside the box. And I think, to directly answer your question, that has improved my sons in a similar fashion, right? And they may not actually have as high an SAT score as someone who went through a traditional schooling environment, but I care a lot less about SAT scores, and I care a lot more about being able to balance a budget, start a business, write something creatively, etc., all the way down to someone who can creatively use automation, right? Like how good a job can you do prompting AI, for example? If you haven't learned to write effectively, you might not be able to do that. How good of a job have you done learning key concepts, such as rhetoric and programming and logic and persuasion and assimilating information at a rapid pace, reading? And these are all skills that don't necessarily have to be taught in a traditional schooling environment, which I think is it's largely a thing of the past when it comes to its efficacy and utility.
Totally. Bringing that back to health, you talked about your employees and your sons. I know you do coaching with people. Are you seeing, notoriously, I'm going to assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's going to be experimentation and thought processes to approaching your health. Your microbiome could be a certain way. You talked about DNA. You might have grown up in Eastern Europe. Now you're living here. So soils were different. Like there's all these variables, right? You live in New York versus you live at the water. It's not like we could just say, here's your exact protocol and we just follow it and you'll be good. In those scenarios, are you seeing the same correlation of there's people that just can't think critically or experiment with you and you need to do a lot more work with them? Or are you guys really good at just understanding where somebody is and then helping them from there?
As far as coaching goes, I'm pretty data driven in my approach. meaning everybody I work with, I'm monitoring their HRV, their sleep. They're typically coming in and doing urinary hormone measurements, stool-based biome measurements, blood work, micronutrient panels, food allergy, and genetic. If I've got all those variables to play with, I've got a pretty good view of what someone's blueprint is doing and what's going on. The environment that somebody's in, it kind of depends. I certainly have executives who I coach who live in big cities or in cultures who have a large amount of drinking, like the UK or Australia. It's a bigger uphill battle for me when I'm having to control toxins, alcohol, the mass amount of dirty electricity in big cities, the large amount of artificial light, et cetera, versus somebody who's living in, say, like a slightly less urban, whatever, Ohio or Idaho, like that. For the most part, though, I think that with the right information, you can tweak and customize somebody's diet, exercise plan, even lifestyle plan in such a way that I don't fight that big of an uphill battle, depending on whether somebody's like in the city or in the country.
Okay, makes sense. Are you finding when they work with you, they're already all in, they're bought in, or do you feel like, again, going back to there's so many variables and inputs that people are prone to, right? Like, this is the best diet, and then this is the best diet, and then you should try this. These supplements are the ones you should go after. Are you finding that you need to really get somebody mentally in a state like, these are all the data points that I'm collecting, this is the exact plan we need to follow, and then they do it? Or are you still seeing pushback, or do they come back to you and say, I saw this diet, and should I try it, Ben? Like, what's been that overall experience in the coaching process?
I encourage my clients to ask a lot of questions. They're required to listen to all my podcasts, and even, so I'll get a lot of check-ins. Hey, Ben, I heard this podcast on whatever, blood glucose monitoring or some new peptide or this new exercise gadget. Is this right for me? And I encourage that. At the same time, I won't beat around the bush. I'm not inexpensive to work with. And by the time someone has actually like put forward the money out of their pocketbook to work with me, they're pretty willing to do just about anything I tell them to optimize. And because I work with a lot of hard charging high achievers, celebrities, actors, athletes, executives, et cetera, these are people who like to treat their body like a Ferrari and are willing to do what I say to actually get it done. I think the biggest uphill battle I face is often either a spouse who's not on board, who's still filling the house with the type of foods that make it hard for my client to follow their diet plan and increase the amount of willpower that's necessary to follow that plan, or typically social variables, right? Like the businessman or businesswoman who just has a lot of dinners out in the town and it's difficult for them to adhere to the diet, constant uphill battle against sleep and alcohol. And do I want to be that weird person at dinner who's asking for the sauce on the side of the steak because I don't know if there's vegetable oils in it, blah, blah, blah. But for the most part, people figure it out. And, I don't require 100% adherence to anything. But folks can hit about an 80-20. They usually feel pretty good.
Awesome. In those two scenarios you did mention, family unit not aligned and potentially busy professional in environments consistently where the goal is not aligned with what that restaurant or society is deeming is available to them. Is there certain maybe tactical things or strategies that you've been able to implement with them that make it easier? Like, is there like hey, here's a cheat sheet that you can talk to about with your spouse and say, hey, these things are important to me. I'm working with Ben. Can you please back me on this? Or I'm going out to dinner, and then shoot a text and say, hey, listen, I'm really on this health kick. I'm going to order these things. Don't think it's weird because that's not what you're used to. Yeah. Like, is there things that you could unpack there a little bit?
All my clients have 24/7 access to me, even though my phone's not on at 2 a.m. I'll often wake up with some text from somebody in New Zealand or whatever. Yeah. But I would say the most important things are that anytime they are traveling, they reach out to me. They let me know where they're traveling, if it's an Airbnb, if it's a hotel with a gym, if they're out in the woods and not going to have access to anything at all. They let me know if they are going to a certain restaurant or have a certain scenario in which they need to make correct food choices. And usually once I have that conversation with them once, any other conversations about how to choose healthy meals at restaurants is typically less necessary. Like, look for these proteins as the cleanest proteins. If you don't know the source of the meat, try not to choose shellfish or pork because those would be the two most toxic. Ask for sauces and dressings on the side if you can. Avoid anything fried. Choose wines from Italy or New Zealand or France because those are the cleanest. Use a bitters forward cocktail with less sugars, something like mezcal tequila or gin or vodka as a clear spirit. And, use a full spectrum salt that you might have in your wallet or your bag rather than the iodized table salt, et cetera. And once they kind of understand how to make the right choices, it just becomes like brushing your teeth. So that's not too difficult. And the same with movement. Like once I've coached somebody, how you work out in an airport and how what BFR band or elastic band or suspension training you bring to an Airbnb, or what you do if things get derailed and you don't have a chance to work out during the day. Walk 10 minutes before or after breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and all you got to do is squeeze in 50 burpees by the end of the day, whatever. All of my clients do have a checklist that they fill out that gets submitted to me at the end of each week. And there are questions on the checklist that are yes/no questions, like, did I take 8,000 steps today? Did I get 20 minutes of sunlight today? Did I get 20 minutes of either earthing or grounding or PEMF in today? Did I connect with my relationships and my spouse at some point at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day? Did I eat X amount of protein, et cetera? So it's kind of like a checklist that allows them to quickly say yes, no, yes, no. And that way I can kind of keep tabs beyond what I'm monitoring from an HRV or a sleep or a wearable standpoint.
My belief, and I don't know, so I'm going to ask you, is I feel like day to day people get busy. And so just having a quick check-in to go, I didn't actually talk to my wife, or I didn't bring the salt, so next time I have to do it. My assumption would be that's extremely powerful and motivating for the clients, because then they're like, I actually know what to do, even if Ben's sleeping.
Yeah. People don't like to check box the nose. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Awesome. The last couple things I want to dive into. Number one was peptides. Lots of controversy around them. Lots of people will have an opinion that's strong one way or the other. I know you talk about peptides, have used peptides, use peptides. Could you just unpack a little bit what exactly are peptides? And then we can get into what your opinions are around them and maybe if there's better ones than others.
Peptide is a sequence of amino acids. Most people are familiar with as the building blocks of protein, but amino acids can also basically act as signaling agents to turn on or off specific signaling pathways or organ function in the body. So a peptide could have an anti-inflammatory effect, or an immune cell stimulating effect, or act on a certain organ like the pancreas or beta cell function, or act on mental function across the blood-brain barrier to cause something like increased expression of brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So very precise molecules. They're difficult to patent. Most of them are natural and biological. They are not something that is looked down upon. To harken back to what you said about them being controversial, there's something that probably due to some amount of pharmaceutical lobbying or given increasing scrutiny by the FDA, it's more difficult to get your hands on good, efficacious peptides. Most are delivered via like a subcutaneous injection, insulin being probably one of the more commonly known peptides for managing blood glucose. But they have a variety of effects. They're very efficacious. You don't have to get them as an injectable. Many are bioavailable in oral form. I like them. I think, they're kind of like a Swiss Army knife when it comes to tackling specific issues. It's just that they are, they're not the cheapest product on the market, and they're increasingly difficult to get a hold of when it comes to good, pure, clean versions of it.
Yeah. Do you think you touched upon it a little bit. Do you think most of the controversy is around, hey, look, people are trying to patent this, and so they're trying to put red tape around them so they're not that available, so that people don't know what they actually are, and it's causing some confusion. Is that the majority of the reason it's being held back, in your opinion?
I think it greatly competes with pharmaceutical drugs. And if someone were going to take like a pharmaceutical anti-inflammatory versus say BPT 157 or TB 500 or something like that, there's a certain threat to the bottom line revenue of pharmaceutical companies. So I think that it's certainly something that I think is affecting the way that the FDA is treating peptides.
Totally. How do you personally use them, and how do you see the future of peptide adoption into the future of healthcare? What's kind of your thought process around that?
Regarding the future of peptides, I don't know what I don't know. I don't know which are going to stay legal and which aren't, and if you got to go get them on the black market or some random online, foreign international website. I don't know. But how do I use them? I mentioned BPC and TB500, which are great for injury. There's a company out of Australia called Level Up Health that has good orally bioavailable peptides for things like testosterone, inflammation, gastric health, etc. And then a few other interesting and notable peptides. I would say there are a couple for the brain that work pretty well, especially in intranasal form. C-Lank and C-Max are a couple of those. The newer GLP-1 agonists for appetite control to curb cravings, even when given in very small doses, much less than what a physician might prescribe, can be very efficacious and even help out with things like gastritis, brain function, lipid management, etc. There are some that can be very promising for mitochondrial health, like epithalon or MOTC. And those also seem to have an impact on longevity, probably because one of the causes of accelerated aging is mitochondrial dysfunction or degradation. So they can help out with that. And then I would say there's some also that seem to have some efficacy for gut health. LL37 is one that seems to be very good for gut issues, small intestine bacterial overgrowth. There are others that can be used pretty effectively for sexual health or erectile dysfunction, like PT141 or melanotan, which was also interesting because it's a tanning agent as well, tan your skin. So yeah, I mean, there's literally dozens and dozens and dozens of peptides with different effects. And I'm not necessarily always on one specific peptide protocol, but, for example, I always have some BPC 157 and TB 500 around if I'm beat up, if I'm injured, if I've hurt a joint. I've messed around a little bit with the GLP-1 agonists like tirzepatide and semaglutide. Those seem to have some effect if I happen to be going out in the town and want to eat a little less that day. And then I would say a couple others I've tried successfully. There's one called deep sleep inducing peptide, which works pretty well for sleep, even though you get used to it pretty quickly. I mean, usually you're just trying to kind of like reset your circadian rhythm. And then for muscle growth or fat loss, using some of these growth hormone stimulants or precursors like tesamorelin or ipamorelin. Usually ipamorelin is combined with something called CJC 1295. And you can do like a 12-week cycle of 5 days on, 2 days off with those two, usually taking something like ipamorelin CJC in the morning, tesamorelin in the evening, or vice versa. And by running a couple of 12-week cycles during the year with that stack, you get pretty good results from a growth hormone stimulation and anabolic standpoint without necessarily using growth hormone per se.
Amazing. Very, very thorough. And thank you for that breakdown. The last thing I did want to get into was there's now a movement of Don't Die backed by Brian Johnson. He's putting on events, etc. I think a lot of people misconstrue the message and they feel like, hey, you're being arrogant. If it's time to go, it's time to go. Die gracefully, sure, but like, why are we trying to play God, etc.? Some people are saying why should we die, right? We become more wise the older we get. We become smarter. We have more neurological connections. There's more technology that we can utilize and build cool things. As a species, we're obviously optimistic. We're sitting in a high-rise building right now that 1,000 years ago didn't even have fire, right? What's your thought process around this specific topic, and where's your head at in terms of dying or not dying?
I think that a transhumanistic approach to life extension that is myopically focused on living as long as possible because this is the only chance that you've got is, to me, a bit fatalistic, because no matter how much work you do, you are going to reach a point where the muscles break down and the bones deteriorate and the organs fail. And maybe you are able to figure out how to make that 150 years old rather than 120 years old. But I'm not sure that is going to result in a significantly greater amount of happiness or satisfaction or fulfillment compared to accepting the fact that you are going to die at some point and engaging in practices that help you have as healthy an existence as possible up until the time it is that you're genetically programmed to begin to die. Paired with the idea that we have an unending, undying, immortal soul or spirit inside each of us that, for better or worse, will go on to exist for eternity. The most hopeful, happiest, fulfilled, and satisfied people who I know have some kind of a spiritual life or spiritual belief that allows them to think beyond the temporal and into the eternal, all the way back to, philosophers and authors like C.S. Lewis or Pences or Aristotle, who taught that we have in us this craving for something that Disney princess might say, something greater than this, right? Something outside of me, something bigger. And you can try and dump as much life extension strategy and cars and homes and sex and money and whatever else into that hole. But until that hole that is eternal is filled with something eternal, there will always be a gnawing of unfulfillment. And so let's just say theoretically that we reset the maximum lifespan to 150, which in my opinion, it would take many, many more years because we've barely been able to push it beyond 117 is the maximum lifespan. And I raise an eyebrow to people who say that we're on the verge of immortality. A lot has to happen for us to address all of the different pathways of aging effectively, short term, and even then, like, we're barely even making a dent. So this idea of extending lifespan, putting all of your energy into that versus, say, spiritual health, relationships, meaning, purpose, making impact by keeping yourself healthy, but not necessarily myopically focused on life extension. I think that that's a much more happy and fulfilling way to live versus just trying not to die, because at some point you are going to die. I would rather accept the fact that, yes, in the flesh I will die, but my spirit will go on to live forever. And as long as I can tend to that spiritual fire during my fleshly life on this earth, that burning bright and beautiful with focusing on relationships and my walk with God and my belief in forgiveness and salvation and eternal life, and the fact that this world was made perfect. We broke it, but we have the opportunity to fix it, to go on to live forever. That's part of my own Christian belief. To me, that's a very, very healthy way to live and hopeful way to live versus this idea that we're all just a bunch of chunks of flesh and blood floating on this planet. And at some point we kick the can and game over.
Yeah. No, very, very well said. And I actually really, really resonate and agree with the fact that every year I hear we're on the brink of living forever. And I'm like, nobody has shown me. I have a tech company in health, so I'm definitely looking at these things. And I was like, nobody has shown me, other than like DNA editing or microbes inside your body that are repairing every cell always on. Yeah. If we actually get to that point, I will say, okay, I think we've nailed it, right? But to today, I had these conversations. I'm like, if you get rid of diabetes, obesity, heart attacks, and strokes, which are the top 4 things that kill us, you gain 4 years of life back. That's it. So you might be 85 instead of 80, right? I'm like, you're not solving for longevity. You're solving for, sure, maybe the last 20, 30 years of my life. I'm not a vegetable. I'm not on 17,000 machines that are breathing for me. Of course, nobody wants that, right? But it's like, let's not pretend that we're always on some breakthrough if we haven't had it. It's naive. And I think we shouldn't be basically marketing to people that we're almost there for whatever gain there is to be had. And I'm an optimist, right? Like and so are you, right? Like you've built an empire and, what's it called? You're on the bleeding edge of these things, and you're basically sitting here saying, look, guys, we don't have it yet. The only thing I did want to touch on was, let's say you are 150 and you are fulfilled and your body of work keeps growing, and maybe at that point you even have great grandchildren, right? In that scenario, would you still be in the position that you are right now, saying, if it's my time to go, it's my time to go? Because the only thing that I'm touching on here is your caveat was, at some point it's time, but the caveat to you was, if you're not fulfilled, or you've kind of done everything you wanted to do. But what if you're still doing things that are exciting? And with technology expanding the way that it is, right? I think there's going to be new and more interesting things. Let's just go all the way to, what if we're now colonizing Mars and we can go back from Earth to Mars? And I know I'm going way out there, but I just wanted to unpack that thought process. Like, what if you're that old, but you don't actually want to go?
That depends on whether you believe, if you do believe that there is a spiritual life after this life, that heaven is sitting on a fluffy cloud with a harp and a set of cool wings forever, which to me sounds pretty boring. Or heaven is simply everything as it was originally created, made perfect, which is my belief. So not only do I believe in immortality and a new and restored body and a new heaven and new earth, but I believe that new heaven and new earth will include forever, as long as I want, read as many books as I want, and play as much guitar as I want, and throw as many footballs as I want, and play as much tennis as I want, and make as many ribeye steaks as I want, and do all of the things that human beings were originally intended to do. Although the death of cows and creation of ribeye steaks might create some controversy. I don't know if cows die in heaven, but you get the idea. So I have immense patience, and I don't have FOMO. And if I am 120 and I have the opportunity to go to Mars, and then I feel unfulfilled because, gosh, I don't have the time, I'm going down on 125 or whatever. No skin off my back. All plenty of time.
Yeah. Beautifully said. Ben, where can people find you to either work with you, check out your content? Yeah, I know you post a lot. You're always on the cutting edge of things. Let us know.
You can find me wherever the internet is found.
Perfect.
And bengreenfieldlife.com.
We'll link all the ways the internet
Right.
the internet can find.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ben.
Awesome.
It was an absolute pleasure,
Thanks, man. Thank you.
Dude.